And I think the leading precedence action involves Manuel Noriega. Back in 1989, the United States seized Noriega from Panama. I think he was holed up in a diplomatic building.
The question, what's the alternative, becomes the defining moment in Schmidt's exchange with a legal expert over the controversial idea of a raid to capture Nicolás Maduro. It's a question that shifts the conversation from abstract legal theory into uncomfortable real-world decision-making. Make sure you listen till the end, otherwise, you might miss it when it cuts off.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia. With that, we will recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Patton, I'd like to pick that up. Did I understand your testimony correctly that the organization you worked for, which is now disbanded or defunded or no longer happening, did you say in your opening testimony that you were responsible for obtaining the indictment of Mr. Maduro?
Said that OCDF task forces did the work that led to the indictment of Mr. Maduro. That was an OCDF task force and the prosecutors, agents, analysts, and so forth.
And that was in 2020 that was unsealed?
Yes, sir.
Was it obtained before that? Do you know?
The indictment was obtained before it was unsealed?
I presume.
Yeah, I presume it was.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
Do you know after the true bill was returned and the indictment was unsealed, was there an arrest warrant issued for Mr. Maduro?
I personally don't know it, but I would assume it.
Do you know what steps were taken by your organization or any of these task forces to actually execute that arrest warrant during the 5 years between when it was unsealed and when you left the organization?
I don't.
Very well. Professor Blackman, let me ask you then a question on that, because that's puzzled me. If we had a valid arrest warrant that, as far as I know, was properly issued by a federal grand jury, a judge ordered federal agents to take Mr. Maduro into custody, is there an obligation on the part of the federal government to at least make some reasonable attempt to execute that order?
Yes, and I think the leading precedence action involves Manuel Noriega. Back in 1989, the United States seized Noriega from Panama. I think he was holed up in a diplomatic building. And at the time, William Barr, the future Attorney General, wrote an opinion saying that when you need to execute a valid warrant to arrest someone for an indictment, you can use military force. In other words, that the force is there to protect. Imagine we just sent FBI agents in a boat to Caracas and said, okay, walk into the country and arrest Maduro. They'd be killed in 5 seconds. So the purpose of this military force is to protect the FBI agents who are effecting the lawful arrest.
Well, and isn't it right, Professor, that the president has a constitutional obligation to take care that the law be faithfully executed?
Absolutely.
And doesn't the law authorize the arrest warrant that directed agents to go take Mr. Maduro into custody?
Absolutely. I mean, Maduro was indicted in March of 2020. There was no action taken over the past 6 years to get him until Trump started ramping up the force when the second administration began.
You posited the absurdity of federal civilian law enforcement officers showing up in a boat and saying, we're here to get Mr. Maduro. But even before that, I mean, there are processes, there are procedures, there are extradition processes. I actually don't know if we had, during this time, an extradition treaty in effect with Venezuela, but is it reasonable to think that those processes where we go to a foreign government and say, please hand us the individual indicted are going to operate when the individual indicted is the head of the foreign government?
No, and especially in this case where the United States disputes the election. I think everyone agrees he's not the legitimate president of Venezuela. So you're asking someone who's not really the head of state to surrender himself. It's not going to happen.
So the president made a judgment, which you've described here, though not attributing it in this case, that the use of military force was necessary in aid of execution of the lawful warrant that he had a duty to execute. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
So what's the alternative? If that is in fact correct, and I don't think anybody here is second-guessing the president's judgment or his military advisor's judgments, that it wasn't going to work to say pretty please, and it wasn't going to work to send some FBI agents in a boat. Therefore, we needed to have a safety bubble provided by the United States military in order for the law enforcement agents to do what they've been lawfully ordered to do, which is take this defendant into custody. What's the alternative?
The alternative is do nothing and just let it.
And that's what we did for 5 years, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. You know, nobody's talked about it here, and maybe it's not applicable because I think it only applies as a matter of law when there are no other legal authorities, and here I think there are plenty of legal authorities the president acted pursuant to. But let's assume, even in that case, that the interesting arguments on the other side are wrong. I remember learning of something called the doctrine of necessity, that sometimes it is necessary to do what must be done in order to carry out the commands of the law. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if there was no other alternative here and the President of the United States was under a lawful order to go take this man into custody, what else was he supposed to do?
He had to take some actions. I think he had the authorities to do what he did.
And if he hadn't, wouldn't he be subject to criticism by folks that don't like him, that he had failed his constitutional obligations?
He probably would have been, yeah.
Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Kansas. With that, I will recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Ms.
Under international law, particularly the framework established by the United Nations, the use of force inside another sovereign country is tightly restricted. Unless there is clear self-defense or authorization from the Security Council, such an operation would likely be deemed illegal. Critics argue that a unilateral raid would violate Venezuela's sovereignty and risk setting a dangerous precedent, essentially normalizing cross-border interventions under the justification of justice. From that perspective, the legal experts' caution is grounded in preserving a fragile global order where rules, not power, are supposed to dictate state behavior. But Schmidt's challenge cuts deeper because it confronts the limits of that system. Nicolás Maduro is not just a head of state, he has been accused by the United States Department of Justice of serious crimes, including drug trafficking and narcoterrorism. In such a scenario, traditional mechanisms like extradition depend on cooperation from the very government led by the accused. Diplomacy has largely stalled, sanctions have produced mixed results, and international courts lack enforcement power without state compliance. So when Schmidt asks, "What's the alternative?" he is really exposing a structural weakness. International law often assumes a level of cooperation that simply doesn't exist in cases like this. The question becomes whether inaction, waiting indefinitely for lawful pathways that may never materialize, is itself a failure of justice. Ultimately, this debate forces a collision between two competing priorities: the preservation of legal norms and the pursuit of accountability. Acting outside the law may achieve immediate results, but it risks eroding the very system designed to prevent global instability. On the other hand, strictly adhering to legal processes in situations where they are ineffective can allow alleged wrongdoing to persist unchecked. Schmidt's question lingers because it has no easy answer. If powerful nations begin to justify unilateral actions based on perceived necessity, the rules-based order could weaken significantly. Yet if they do nothing, they risk signaling that certain leaders are beyond reach. In that tension lies the real dilemma, not just about Nicolás Maduro, but about how far the world is willing to go when the law and reality no longer align. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update.